What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch back here with another NFL video. And in this video, I'm going to update you with my NFL rankings, my NFL tier rankings, ranking from the best teams in the NFL, the contenders, all the way until the bottom 8. That means the bottom teams in every division, all 8 divisions. I did give you my rankings or my tier rankings before free agency began, and now that free agency is pretty much over now, most of the main guys have signed. There's still some guys out there that have yet to sign, and it may change a little bit. I'll give you another tier ranking after the draft. So before we get to the whole draft process and the draft itself, I did want to update you on kind of where I'm at in terms of every team in the NFL and give you a little bit of a thought, an inside thought on where I stand on your team. So before I give you my thoughts on your team, make sure that you do Gronk spike the like button. And of course, if you are new, subscribe to the Bottom Line View for more NFL videos just like this. And don't be afraid to comment your opinion below. Let me know how you feel about your team right now. Did you like your team's free agency? Do you think they went out and covered some of their needs? Or do you think they didn't do enough in free agency to really be ranked highly? Let me know in the comment section below. Let me know where you stand on your team. So let's get into my tier rankings. All right, so the tiers will be broken down into 5 different tiers. We have the top one being the contenders. These are the 7 best teams in the NFL. The reason why I chose 7 in particular is because half of the playoffs will be 7 teams. Now that the NFL has changed their playoff format, it's going to be 14 teams in the playoffs instead of 12. So instead of 6 contenders, I've moved it to 7 contenders. And that's the same for the playoff teams. So a playoff team is somebody who's going to be in the playoffs, but I don't quite see being as a legitimate Super Bowl threat at this moment in time. That will also be broken down into 7 more teams. The borderline playoff teams will be broken down into 5 teams because there's not that many teams that are actually close to making the playoffs but don't quite make it. And then the mediocre is, okay, you're not the worst in the league, you're not the bottom 8, but you're also not really near the playoff conversation. So that's the mediocre tier. That's also 5 teams. And then the bottom 8 is, of course, 8. So it will go 8, 5, 5, 7, 7. Make sure you also in the comments leave your tier rankings below, contender all the way through your bottom 8. And I'm going to go through the list just as it looks on the screen. I did not make this ranking the way it is, so I didn't choose to start with the Titans, but I'm going to because that's the way that the website has it. So let's start off with the Tennessee Titans, and I'm doing this all off the top of my head. So let's just go with the Tennessee Titans. Okay, they were AFC Championship last season versus the Chiefs. Fairly competitive in that game. Of course, shocked the world, not only beating New England, but then also beating the number 1 seed Baltimore, both on the road. This year, I feel like so far their free agency hasn't been great. I expected a little bit more from them. Of course, they did lose Jack Conklin at right tackle, so that's a big loss. They did re-sign Kelly to help out in that regard, but that's still a decline in that area. They got back Derrick Henry. They signed Ryan Tannehill long-term. So those are all great things, and their offense should be relatively solid. Defensively, Vic Beasley is in there. That's the main change. And they did get rid of Jarrell Casey, which I think is a major loss for their interior defensive line. We'll have to see what they do in the draft. Logan Ryan's still not signed as well at cornerback, but they will get back Malcolm Butler. So I think overall their defense is a little worse, but their offense is about the same, maybe a tiny bit worse because of the loss of Conklin, but the draft should help kind of with all of those areas. So Tennessee Titans, as of now, I have as a playoff team. I don't quite see them as a contender, but given their division, I don't really see a clear-cut team in that division, a clear-cut favorite, whether it's the Titans, Texans, Colts, really in the conversation for me to win that division. I just don't see any of them the cut above the rest. And for the Titans, I trust their coach. I trust Tannehill in his second year, only getting better. Remember, Mariota started the year last year. A big reason they weren't able to pick up the wins and momentum early in the season. Their defense is pretty good, but not great. Derrick Henry is there, of course, and I think Corey Davis and A.J. Brown will only get better. So I like the Titans. I'm not completely sold they'll be in the playoffs, but I do like them right now at this moment, being a team that I can safely say will be in the playoffs. The Miami Dolphins, this is interesting to me. I actually don't have them in the bottom tier. I've moved them up to the mediocre category, and you'll see who I have in last place in the AFC East going forward here. But the Miami Dolphins, I've really liked what they've done, and I can't really even keep track off the top of my head all of the moves they've made, specifically defensively, but they've made a couple key ones on the offensive line, one of them being, I know, Ted Karras at center, and then defensively, they added a bunch of edge rushers, whether that was Kyle Van Noy or Shaq Lawson. And then in the secondary, the big ones are, of course, Byron Jones being added to the cornerback position. They've done a lot of other stuff. I believe they signed a Landon Roberts and a lot of guys. But those are kind of like the main ones off the top of my head that I can remember. And I think this team right now is significantly more talented, which is a key thing here. The Dolphins were not a very talented team last season. They did not have a lot of great players on their roster. They did not have a lot of straight up ballers, right? And Brian Flores proved in his first season that he could get the most out of very limited talent in terms of motivating them, in terms of having a collective goal and everybody kind of feeding into it and feeding and buying into the system. And I think that is obviously a huge thing for a coach. He's going to do even better in his second year. I don't know really who the quarterback's going to be, so that's holding me back from saying they're any better than mediocre. I think even calling them mediocre at this point is a little bold, but I really like what their defense really has the makings of, with two phenomenal corners and then the creativity of Flores and players like Kyle Van Noy to get after the quarterback. I really like aspects of their team right now, but still they have tons of holes to address in the draft, and they definitely will do so in the draft. So the Dolphins, to me, are not the worst team in the AFC East at this moment in time. That will be saved for another team down the line. The Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns, I think, have had a very good free agency. I think they've actually addressed a lot of areas, including signing Conklin from the Titans at one of their tackle spots. I think they've done a good job at addressing some of their defensive line issues, like depth concerns. And then I believe they signed Andrew Billings. They signed a lot of lower tier guys in the secondary, like Carl Joseph. And I've liked the moves. Not a lot of big names. Obviously, Austin Hooper they signed at tight end, which I think will open up the offense, specifically the type of offense they like. And I think their running game is going to be great. They have three awesome weapons in the passing game, not including the running backs. I think Mayfield will have a much better season. And the biggest thing to even mention is you hope that their coaching situation is a lot better going into this season, which I think it might be. So I'm going to say that the Cleveland Browns are not a playoff team, but a borderline playoff team. I almost scared you there by putting them in the bottom 8. That's not going to be the case this year, I don't think, with the Cleveland Browns. I see them as maybe a playoff team this year. Right now, I have them as a borderline playoff team. I just don't know if I have enough confidence yet to say that they are quite a playoff team. There's the stigma of being the Cleveland Browns. There's the fact that I don't know if Baker is really going to be an elite quarterback. Like last year, he struggled mightily at times. I think he could do okay. I think he could be solid, but I just don't know if he can be that guy to take you there. And then defensively, I still think they have issues at safety, and I still think they have issues at linebacker. So the Browns, while I do like what they've done so far, I want to see a couple more things done before I can call them a playoff team. And also with the Browns, a little bit of it is like, I need to see it before I believe it. The Jacksonville Jags, this one's kind of obvious. I think I've already kind of alluded to this one. They're the bottom 8. They've lost a lot of key contributors to their success of the past, specifically the season they went to the AFC Championship in 2017. They lost a lot of those players. They got rid of Calais Campbell. Ngakwe still on the trade block. And Jalen Ramsey was traded last year. They got rid of AJ Bouye through trade. They did make a couple of nice moves, a couple under the radar moves that not a lot of people have looked at, but I don't think they've really done enough that has me saying, wow, I'm really liking what the Jags are doing. Like defensively, I think they're mediocre at best. I still think their secondary has a lot of issues, and their front seven is not what it used to be. And then you look at the offense. I mean, they don't really have a standout stud weapon. Some people may say Chark can be that guy. But outside of really him, I mean, Minshew at quarterback, he's one of the bottom 10 guys in the league. So I can't really say I love much about Jacksonville. Would it shock me if they won more games than really I expect them to? Would it shock me if they went third in their division? Yeah, actually, it kind of would. I'd be kind of surprised if they finished anything but last in the AFC South, because I actually believe that the three teams ahead of them in that division, I like them a lot more at this point. But if Minshew has a great season and he progresses, and maybe it could happen, I'm not sure. But I think Jacksonville, they have a lot of work to do, and I just don't think this season is their season. Maybe a couple years from now they can get back into the playoffs, but I just don't think 2020 is their year. I think there's too much that has to be done to this roster, and I'm not a huge fan of the coaching staff as well. So the Detroit Lions, the Lions are a team that, of course, a lot of Lions fans subscribe to this channel because I've been a very positive voice for their team. So it always hurts me to be kind of negative on them, but I also try to stay as truthful as possible, even though I know that there's a lot of Lions fans out there that might dislike me if I say that they're not gonna do some things, right? So with the Lions, I made a video, a very controversial video before free agency began, saying that they could be the next 49ers, and a lot of people laughed at me and stuff like that. But what I said in that video was they need to come out and have a fantastic offseason. And so far, it's been up, it's been down, it's been mediocre, and it hasn't been quite what I wanted it to be, and it hasn't quite been what I thought it could be. So for that matter of fact, I am not going to actually place them in the bottom 8. I will place them in the mediocre category. They finished last in their division last year, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm pretty sure. And I don't know if they'll finish last this year. I like some of the moves they've made. Obviously, losing Slay hurts, but you get back a true Font at a lesser price, so I understand that move. I like the additions at linebacker, especially Jamie Collins. I think they've done some positive things on the defensive line with Danny Shelton. Trading for Deron Harmon is going to help. Offensively, adding some depth to the receiver group with Geronimo Allison today was a nice move. And offensive line-wise, I think they've gotten a little weaker, but I don't think it's going to be drastically worse than it was before. And I do expect them to address some of that offensive line in the draft. So for me, the Lions, as long as Matt Stafford is healthy and on the field, I don't think they actually are the worst team in the division. Now, if Matt Stafford ends up missing significant time once again in 2020, then I'll change my perspective and my idea of this team. But right now, as it stands, the Detroit Lions, to me, are the third best team in this division. So the Detroit Lions I have in the mediocre category. Now, the Minnesota Vikings, right? The Vikings are also in the NFC North, and the Vikings have had quite an interesting offseason. They've been able to retain players that I didn't think they would be able to retain, but they've also lost players that I didn't think they would actually lose in Stephon Diggs. I think that's the biggest one that it's really notable. I mean, losing that number one caliber receiver in Stephon Diggs, understanding that you had one of the most dynamic wide receiver duos in the NFL in Diggs and Thielen, and losing that guy is going to really hurt the production of this offense. I understand that this offense is a run-first offense. It's a play-action-based offense. A lot of what they want to do is through the run and through the play-action and through Kirk Cousins, Adam Thielen, the tight ends, and the running game. But without Stephon Diggs, it allows the defense to key on those other areas a lot easier than they would in the past. So for that, I think their offense has declined pretty significantly there. And then in the drop back pass game, I really don't know who their number 2 receiver is. I don't know who their go-to targets are outside of Adam Thielen. Defensively, they're pretty much the same. They lost Linval Joseph, but they signed Pierce from Baltimore, which I think is a swap. Basically, you get a younger Linval Joseph. Then you look at the secondary, they lost a couple of guys, but I don't think they're really much worse. Losing Trey Waynes may hurt a little bit. Losing Alexander may hurt a little bit, but those players are not irreplaceable. Losing Rhodes is almost like a benefit to them. He was horrible with the Vikings for a couple of seasons now, and getting rid of that money was huge. But retaining Harris on the franchise tag was massive for them. So I feel like their defense is about the same, and I think they will address the corner position in the draft, so I'm going to take that into account. But really, I think the Vikings are just a little worse because they did lose Stephon Diggs. So that being said, I think they have gone from a playoff team to a mediocre playoff team, or a borderline playoff team, I should say, beside the Cleveland Browns. Now, I think they're probably around the 8th or 9th best team in the NFC for me right now. I don't think they're quite in that playoff conversation because some teams in the NFC have gotten better and some have added some new players, which have allowed them to become better teams. And I think the Vikings have been one of the teams in the NFC, a competitive NFC, to take a step back. So I have the Vikings as a borderline playoff team. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Everybody wants to know where I'm going to put the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And hey, this might be a little bullish and all of that, but I've been watching my tape on the Bucs from last year. I've been watching their games. I've been all over it. I like their roster a lot. I love their coaching staff, and soon enough I'll be making a video on why I believe this team is legit and a very good team going into the season. But I have the Bucs as a contender. And this is not just to do with Tom Brady, but it's also in the fact of losing Jameis Winston. Right? Because Tom Brady, I believe he's gone 4 seasons combined without throwing 30 interceptions. Jameis Winston threw 30 interceptions and had another 8 to 10 fumbles last year. That's a lot of turnovers. And there's not a lot of really numbers that you can look at and say, okay, this is going to instantly impact this. But just the psychological impact of having a quarterback who's not going to turn the ball over, but also make plays in Tom Brady, and then have a Jameis Winston gone who would repeatedly make really dumb mistakes. And yes, he would make equally amazing plays, but that is going to be so much easier. And I believe that this offense is going to be really, really good. I think Ronald Jones is underrated. I think this offensive line is underrated. They have probably the best receiver duo in the league. They have a solid tight end duo. They have more to add in the draft, but they have, I think, arguably the best starting front 7 in the NFL when you look at the defensive line, then the linebackers. You're talking about 2 studs inside with Levante David and White, and then you're talking about Shaq Barrett and Pierre-Paul on the outside, are 2 premier pass rushers in the NFL. Ndamukong Suh, getting him back, is massive, and Vita Vea is a stud. The secondary is unknown, but it's also not as bad as you would think. The numbers say that they were worse, but if you actually look back at the tape and look back at the end of last year, a lot of situations they were put in were bad because of Jameis Winston. And I think with Tom Brady there, he's going to rise their level of play. He's going to get the most out of them in practice, which is going to translate to the actual field. They have another season with Bowles on defense. They have another season with Arians on offense. This team is going to perfectly mesh at the right time. And I think the Bucs will actually be one of the top teams in the NFC when we're looking at the playoff conversation in January. So the Bucs I have as a contender right now at this second. The San Francisco 49ers, I also have as a contender. I am a little sour on the 49ers after losing the Super Bowl because I thought that was their time to win that Super Bowl. You know, I understand that the Chiefs also, it was their time to win this Super Bowl, but the 49ers had it in their grasp, and you always have to wonder how that's going to psychologically impact a team after losing a Super Bowl in the fashion they did. Is it going to have a trickle-down effect with the roster in relation to Jimmy Garoppolo, their quarterback? Is Kyle Shanahan going to get the same out of this team in another year? Just the mental and physical grind of a long playoff run, when you lose that Super Bowl, has such a big impact on your team going into the next year. But when you look at their roster, what they've really lost is Emmanuel Sanders, DeForest Buckner, and that's about it. as far as I'm concerned. Offensive line-wise, they're going to be solid. Offensive scheme-wise, they're still at the top of the league. They have George Kittle. Jimmy is good, but he's not great, so don't expect anything elite from him. Maybe a slight progression, but nothing huge. I think he's close to his ceiling right now. Running game is great, but I think they need another receiver, another game breaker. We'll see if they get that in the draft. Defensive line-wise, losing DeForest Buckner is huge, but Solomon Thomas needs to step up, and the rest of the guys in there need to step up as well. They'll still be one of the better defensive lines in the league. The linebacking group is really good and arguably underrated. The secondary is very good. I would say it's a little overrated, but it's still solid, and we have to see if Sherman's still going to be the same player another year older. But overall, I see the 49ers as still one of the most talented teams in the NFC, still the team with the best coach in the NFC, arguably, and at least the best offensive coach. And I think that the 49ers are still a team at the top of the NFC competing for the Super Bowl, competing for the NFC Championship. Then you look at the Atlanta Falcons. Some people think they're going to have a bounce back year. Some people think they're only on their way down. And I'm kind of still stuck somewhere in the middle with Atlanta. I still feel like they have way too many. See, this is tough. I don't know whether to put them as a borderline playoff team or as mediocre. So, that's actually very difficult. I'm going to say that they're mediocre right now. That's kind of where I'm leaning. I feel like Atlanta, they just have still too many holes. Like, they have not addressed their offensive line because they've had no money to. Their running back position, sure, they got Todd Gurley, big name. But is Todd Gurley actually going to help you win games? I'm going to say no. Yeah, he's going to be nice to have. The name value, selling tickets is going to be fun. He's going to help maybe in the receiving game a little bit. I don't see him having a major season. I don't see him as one of the best running backs in the game. I think he's nowhere near that anymore. He's still a solid back. I think he's an improvement over what they had. Don't get me wrong. And I said that when they signed him. But I don't think he's a guy that translates into wins. Running backs rarely do. Then you look at the receiver group. They're still good, but they're missing that number 3 guy. They're missing the tight end. Is Hurst really going to be that guy? Is he going to be what Hooper was? We don't know. Okay, and back to the offensive line. It's still a lot of questions there, but they're young and they should get better. I will say that. Defensively, Grady Jarrett, awesome. Dante Fowler, awesome. Rest of the line is okay, or worse. Linebacking core has gotten worse in my opinion with Devondre Campbell leaving. Secondary is not good, in my opinion. They don't have any corners, which they really need to address that. And if you're going to play versus Drew Brees and Tom Brady, you need to have corners. Safety position is solid, especially Neal, but he's had a lot of injuries. And Deion Jones is fantastic in the middle of the defense. But their defense is still bottom 10, in my opinion. And their offense is probably borderline top 10, but it's not like as great as it used to be. So I'm going to say that Atlanta is a mediocre team that has some potential, but I don't really see it at this moment. If they make a great draft and have a great draft, then I'll change my mind. I do really like the Fowler signing, but outside of that, I don't really like much of their free agency. Baltimore is a contender. Baltimore is a contender. They're one of the best teams in the AFC. They had this whole crazy thing with Michael Brockers not playing for them, and now they signed Derek Wolfe, so they kind of regained that player back, and they're kind of interchangeable. Maybe Wolfe's a little worse than Brockers, but either way, still they're going to have a studly interior defensive line, which is going to really help their defense. They have a great secondary. They have not a great linebacking core, and not a great edge position. Hopefully they'll keep Judon because I think he'll help a lot, especially this year for this team. If they want to go after that Super Bowl, I think it's wise to keep him for one more year. Offensive-wise, they did use Marshall Yonda, which was before free agency. Marshall Yonda, to say it correctly. They lost him before free agency. A lot of people forgot that actually happened. So their offensive line will probably be a little worse. And they haven't really added any receiving weapons. They've only lost Hurst. They still have the same running game. They still have Lamar Jackson. I think their defense is going to be better this year, and I think their offense is going to be worse, but I think they're going to be somewhere around 12-4, somewhere around there, and the draft will only help them. So I think the Ravens, contenders, and they are a great drafting team. So I'm very confident in getting some extra depth players in there, and maybe even one significant contributor from this draft class. The Chicago Bears. So I alluded to that the Lions are not the worst team in the NFC North. I have the Chicago Bears as the worst team in the NFC North. And here's why. The quarterback position. I think Matt Stafford, and the difference between him and Nick Foles or Mitchell Trubisky is the difference between being third or fourth in this division. Matt Stafford, to me, is a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, and I think whoever starts for the Bears is arguably the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. And that's a big difference. You add Jimmy Graham, who I think stinks now. I think is a waste of money. Running back position is solid. Offensive line is still kind of shaky, although you've upgraded a little bit there. Wide receiver group is basically the same. I like Anthony Miller going into another season. I will say that. Defensively, great defensive line. Robert Quinn, I think, is a risky signing, but could work out for them. You lost Nick Kwiatkowski in the middle of your defense, which I felt was your best middle linebacker last year. Safety, you lost Clinton-Dix. Corner, you don't really have a number 2. There's still some holes on this roster, but they have improved their edge position. They have improved their offensive line. And I would say, I think that's about it. I mean, throwing Nick Foles in there could be an upgrade to the quarterback position, but I don't know how much of an upgrade. So to me, the worst team in the NFC North, although not the least talented, I do believe that the Lions are still the least talented, but because they have Matt Stafford, they're a little bit better than the Bears. The Cincinnati Bengals, although I've been speaking and praising them as of late, they're still a bottom 8 team. Their division is very competitive. The Browns, the Steelers, the Ravens, all better, more talented teams than the Bengals. I do believe the Bengals are on the rise, though. They've made very interesting and compelling signings this offseason that I think will help them this year. I think they're going to be a competitive team that loses a lot of close games. I like some of their offense. I think their offensive scheme is not too shabby from moments last year that I saw. Joe Mixon's an elite running back. I think Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks coming out in a while. I think him and Kyler in the last couple of years have been really impressive to me, and I think he's closer to that than he is like Darnold or any of those type of guys. I think overall, looking at the offensive line, it's about the same. Defensively, their defensive line is better. DJ Reader is an impact player. Secondary is better. I think the Bengals are a better team, and I actually think their roster is underrated, but I just don't think it's enough to be better than the last in this division at this moment in time. The Dallas Cowboys are a playoff team to me. Given that there's 7 teams, I believe they might have been in the playoffs last year, or it might have been the Rams. Either way, the Cowboys are a team that are rather in the playoffs or just miss the playoffs just about every year. So if there's any team in the NFC that will actually benefit from a 7 team in the NFC playoffs, it will likely be the Dallas Cowboys. And they are one of the most talented teams in the league still, even though they've lost a couple of players. Robert Quinn on the edge. They lost Byron Jones in the secondary. And looking at their team, I think their defensive line, their interior defensive line is better. Adding McCoy is going to help. Adding Poe is going to help. And I think they both give different dimensions to the interior defensive line. But you haven't replaced Rob Quinn yet on the edge. Offensive line, losing Travis Frederick is a big deal at center, but you could replace him in the draft. The receiver position is still solid even though you lost Cobb. Tight end, you lost Witten, but you're about the same. I don't think Witten's a huge loss. Quarterback, Dak should be back. Defensively, your secondary, safety's better, corner is worse. Clinton-Dix will be an upgrade there. Linebacker, you were able to hold them all together, so that's nice. So the Cowboys, I think they're a little less talented, but I think their coaching will help them be actually a little bit better of a team. So the Cowboys still have the draft to fill some of their needs at center, secondary, all of that, but I think the Cowboys are about a playoff team right now for me. The Houston Texans, for me, are a borderline playoff team. The Texans are Deshaun Watson, basically. And because Deshaun Watson is so great, a top 5 quarterback in the NFL right now today, at this moment. And honestly, Bill O'Brien might suck as a GM, but he is a good coach. I will not say that he is not. He brought Brock Osweiler and Brian Hoyer and all these bums to the playoffs. He deserves to be called a good coach, but he is not a good GM for what he's done with this roster. I actually don't think their receiving core is what I'm worried about. Their offense is not what I'm worried about. I think David Johnson actually is an upgrade at running back and all of that. And their offensive line got better last year with Tunzel in the mix at left tackle. Their defense is significantly worse than what it used to be. They're J.J. Watt and maybe a couple other players, and that's about it. I mean, DJ Reader is gone now. They traded Jadeveon Clowney. They have no legitimate good corners on their roster, really. Maybe one. That's about it. Reed, I like at safety, but I don't like much else. I mean, McKinney is a solid linebacker, but he's a linebacker. They don't have another pass rusher. They don't have corners. I mean, their defense is one of the worst in the league. And I think it was one of the worst last year. One of the most inconsistent, at the very least. And they're going to suffer on that side of the ball. And even though they offensively will probably score some points again, as long as Will Fuller's out there, of course, their defense is just not good enough for me to call them a playoff team. I think they're going to decline this year. And even though Watson's amazing, it's going to take a lot for him to take this team to the playoffs with a better division. The Colts I have as a playoff team right now. The Colts actually have improved a lot. And the main reason I am confident in saying the Colts can be a playoff team is because I think they've improved the quarterback. Phillip Rivers will be better than Jacoby Brissett. And even though I ripped into Phillip Rivers last year and I did not like the way he played, there is not a better team that he could have signed with than the Indianapolis Colts, given that they have arguably the best offensive line in the entire NFL. And they are a team that is going to give him protection, and he'll be able to get the ball out quick to his weapons. What I want to see from the Colts is, do they add more weapons around Rivers? Because that's a problem. They don't have Ebron, and they don't really have a legitimate number 2. Can Campbell step up and be that guy? We don't know, and Hilton's hurt a lot. But they have a great running game. They still have Jack Doyle, and they have T.Y., and that will be enough offensively. Given that their defense has improved, they signed Xavier Rhodes, which I think is a make or break type of deal, like a bust or a major hit in the secondary. Defensive line, of course, DeForest Buckner is going to be awesome for them with a legitimate weapon on the defense. Their linebacking core is already pretty solid, especially Darius Leonard. I think their defense is going to be a little better, and their offense is going to be a little better because of the play of Rivers. And I like their coach, and I think they're still going to improve this team through a little bit in free agency and through the draft. So I like the Colts as improving to a playoff team this year. The LA Rams I have as a mediocre team. Yes, that's a steep decline from 2 years ago. Or sorry, I actually have to place them as a bottom 8 team. I was going to say they're mediocre, which I do believe they're not like one of the worst teams in the league. This is not what I'm trying to say, but I think they're the worst team in their division. I'm going to say that. Bold, whatever. But Jared Goff, to me, is the worst quarterback in the division. Their offensive line is 3rd or 4th in the division. Their defensive line, Aaron Donald's great, Michael Brockers, Ashawn Robinson, they improved that area. But they lost Corey Littleton. They lost Clay Matthews. They lost Dante Fowler. They lost some guys in the secondary. Roby Coleman. They might lose Brandon Cooks. They lost Todd Gurley. They lost a lot. And their team is not the same. Like I said earlier, they never have had a lot of depth. And losing those studs is going to show that this year. McVay is a good coach, but they are just not built right now to be a team that can go to the playoffs. Yes, they have Ramsey. Yes, they have Donald. But they're not good enough. They have studs. They have superstars, but they don't have a team. And that's an issue. And that's going to make you finish last, especially when your quarterback is not one of the best in the league. The LA Chargers, this is tough because I don't know if they're... Honestly, the Chargers might be the most talented team in their division, including the Chiefs, but they do not have a quarterback. If Patrick Mahomes was on the Chargers, this team would be a playoff Super Bowl caliber team. But they have Tyrod Taylor. They've improved their defense drastically. Their secondary is elite, especially their corner position. Their defensive line is only going to get better with Joseph in there. They have Boza, they have Ingram, they have Hunter Henry back, they have Eckler back, they have Williams, Allen. Offensive line will be better. with Bulaga coming in at right tackle, Turner coming at guard. I'm going to say they're mediocre because I don't think I can quite say they're a borderline playoff team, knowing that Tyrod Taylor right now is their quarterback. And I don't think, because they're so talented and for what they've done in free agency, I don't think they're the bottom 8. So I'm going to say that they are the third best team in their division right now. The Kansas City Chiefs are obviously in the bottom 8. No, I'm just kidding. They're a contender. They're one of the best teams in the league. Even though they really don't have any corners on their roster right now, the Chiefs are still one of the best teams in the AFC and in the NFL, period, end of story. They have Pat Mahomes, they have Andy Reid, they have Tyreek Hill, they have McCole Hardman. Looks like they're going to hold on to Sammy Watkins. They have Travis Kelce. They have their offense intact. Defensively, yes, they're probably a little weaker, but I don't think they're significantly worse, and we'll have to see what they do in the draft. And I think this is a team that, as free agency wears on, they'll pick up a couple of lower-tier free agents that I think will play big roles for them. So Kansas City, contenders for sure. The New Orleans Saints are also no doubt contenders this year. They've only gotten better through free agency, which I thought would be difficult for them, given that we're in not a good cap situation. But Emmanuel Sanders is one of the best signings for any team in this free agency. It's going to open up their entire offense. They have one of the best weapon groups in the league now with Sanders, Thomas, Kamara, Cook, and all those guys. And their offensive line's already elite. Defensively, they're solid, and they brought back Malcolm Jenkins, which I thought was a nice move, so they're a contender for sure. The Giants, I don't think, are in the bottom 8. I don't think they're the worst team in their division. I think they are a mediocre team. The Giants, I think, are the third best team in their division right now. I think they could actually be a sleeper team this year. I don't really love their defense, but they have improved in the secondary, and they have improved up front overall. I think their offense is about the same, but Daniel Jones is going to get better. And I think Daniel Jones is actually legitimately going to be a good quarterback, and Saquon will be healthy, which is a huge bonus because he's a game breaker. And Evan Ingram will be healthy. He's also a game breaker. So I think that the Giants are going to be kind of a sleeper team, but they're not quite there yet all around where they can be in the playoff conversation just yet. Would it shock me, though, if they made the playoffs? No, but I think they're just 1 or 2 years away from being there. The Eagles, this is tough. I think I have the Eagles as a contender. I think I have them as the back contender, I want to say. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have one more team to put in the contender category. Right now, I'll put the Eagles there. We'll see if I have to move them or not. But the Eagles, I think, have improved their defense enough for me to say they are a contender. Their defense could truly be a top 5 unit. Adding Roby Coleman to the secondary at slot corner, nickel corner, which is going to be a drastic improvement there. Darius Slay as the number 1 is going to be a drastic improvement, which is going to help the rest of their defense. Not to mention they're going to get Malik Jackson back from injury. And they also signed the big stud in the interior from the Steelers. For some reason, blanking on his name. Hopefully it comes back to me. Not Tuitt, not Hayward, Hargrave. They signed him as well, who's a stud. So they have Brandon Graham, they have Cox, they have Hargrave, they have Barnett, who's getting better. I mean, this D-line is scary, and they have a legitimately good secondary now. And their linebacking core is not great, but I think they could find some pieces in the draft and maybe a couple free agents as we go through the entire process here. Offensively, they still are lacking receivers, but that's the receiver and linebacker. If they address those two needs, they might be the 1 or the 2 in the NFC for me, because that defense, I'm telling you, is going to be way better this year. The Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers are a playoff team to me. I really think Ben Roethlisberger is going to come back and play really well. The fact that Roethlisberger has always been a guy who has never thrown in training camp much. He's never really thrown in the offseason until training camp has started in the past. I think he's going to be sharper. I think he's going to be ready to go game one. I think he's going to be more accurate early in the season. I think he's going to really look good. I actually believe in him this year. And I think they have a little bit of a sleeper on offense in terms of their receiving group. I think people are sleeping there. I think Ebron's an awesome addition to this offense at tight end. Their offensive line is still great. I think Wisniewski was a good fill-in there at guard. And their running back situation isn't my favorite, but it's not horrible. Defensively, yes, losing Hargrave hurts, but I think the rest of their defense right now is really, really good. And you could argue one of the 5 best defenses in the league. And they were one of the 3 best defenses last year, in my opinion. So the Steelers are going to have a borderline top 10 quarterback with a borderline top 5 defense, a borderline top 5 offensive line. I don't know how they are not a playoff team next year as long as Ben is healthy. The Denver Broncos, to me, are just a cut above the LA Chargers as a borderline playoff team. Not quite a playoff team. To me, the Broncos might be the most difficult team to predict going into next year because I did not see enough from Drew Lock for me to be totally 100% convinced that he can get this team to the playoffs yet. But I like what they've done in free agency for the most part. Their defensive line with Jarrell Casey is going to be powerful and tough to stop. Chubb and Miller are destructive. Their secondary is good. It's solid. I wouldn't say it's like elite, but it's good. It's like not top 10, but like close. And this defense will probably be top 10 because they have Fangio, they have that defensive line, they have those pass rushers, they have a couple cover guys. And then offensively, their offensive line's better. They got Melvin Gordon. They have younger players like Fant coming into their own this year. Sutton. I think this team is really close to a playoff team. I don't know if I can quite put them there yet. The Green Bay Packers are a playoff team. I don't quite see them as a contender, but I think they are a playoff team for sure. I think they're the clear-cut favorite in the NFC North, being that they have the best quarterback in the division. They have one of the best offensive lines, if not the best offensive line in the division. They have a really good group of pass rushers. They have a young secondary that's only getting better. They showed that last year. And I like the add of actually a sleeper out of Devin Funchess at receiver. Yes, losing Brian Bulaga hurts, but they got Rick Wagner in there, who I don't think is that big of a disadvantage or like a downgrade, I wouldn't say. I think they're about the same team they were last year. They haven't made any incredible moves yet, but I don't think they really needed to. I think if they add just a couple of players in the draft that take them to the next level, they could be a contender for sure. The Carolina Panthers are a bottom 8 team. They're certainly the worst team in their division, being that Tom Brady has entered their division with Tampa Bay. They have the Saints, who are basically a perennial playoff team, and they have the Atlanta Falcons, who I think have the 3rd best quarterback in the division, but they're the 3rd best team as well. And the Panthers, they almost look like they're trying to rebuild. Would I be shocked if the Panthers were better than I expected? No, because I think they have some potential, but especially the offense has a lot of potential, but I'm not a huge believer in Bridgewater. I think their offensive line is still a bit shaky. I think their secondary is very shaky right now, and they need to improve it a lot. And their linebacking group is not going to be the same without Kuechly. So the Panthers, I think they're the worst team in their division, but it's going to be tough because they're kind of in a transitional year this year. The Raiders are the team that I didn't want to put in this group, but I feel like I kind of was forced to, and that's the bottom 8. Now, the Raiders are one of these teams that I could see them actually making the playoffs this year, but it really depends on the draft. If they get like a game-breaking receiver and a game-breaking corner, they're a playoff team. They needed a weapon on offense. They really need a weapon. They have yet to really grab a weapon for Derek Carr that's a clear-cut number 1 receiver. Their offensive line is elite. Their running game is elite. Waller is really good. I think Carr is actually a little underrated given that he hasn't had an elite weapon in like 2 to 3 years. That hurts him a lot. Gruden's a great coach and showed me a lot last year. Defensively, they're going to be better, but their secondary needs to improve through the draft and through the last stages of free agency for me to say that they can really get to the playoffs. But I like what they've done with their D-line. I like what they've done with their linebacking group. I just want to see receiver and corner upgrade, and then we're talking Raiders. Washington is certainly a bottom 8 team. You know, you're going to talk about them and say they're better than I think, but they don't have any weapons on offense outside of Scary Terry. Their running game, yes, you think it's good. It's mediocre at best. Their offensive line is not great. Their quarterback is arguably the worst in the league. Their defense is not bad. Their front seven is pretty good, but their secondary still has a lot of questions about it. So they're easily, to me, the worst team in the NFC East. The Cardinals, I have as a, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I have one more division to put in the bottom 8. I may have miscounted this a little bit. I have 4 in there. Playoff teams, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I need 7 in there. I might have to move some teams up. So let me see. I might have to move some teams up and move some teams around. But let's say that the Cardinals are a... This is difficult. Split decision here. I'm between borderline playoff team and mediocre. You know what? I'm going to say borderline playoff team. I'm going to be a little bold here. I think they're a borderline playoff team. I think the Cardinals, because they have Kyler Murray, who I think is an absolute stud. They added DeAndre Hopkins, who is a stud in his own right. Christian Kirk, Larry Fitz, Andy Isabella. That's going to be a great receiving group. Running back with Kenyon Drake is solid and fits their system great. I think Cliff has a really good offense that I really liked in his first year and his first stages. The offensive line is still shaky, but I think if they add like a left tackle or a right tackle in the draft, that will help a lot. Defensively, I think they've gotten better. Devondre Campbell, couple signings in the defensive line. I think they're better. I think they're going to be significantly better because Kyler is going to make them significantly better. And year 2 is usually when you see the biggest jump from these studly quarterbacks. And I think that's going to be the case with Kyler this year. Year 2, year 3, that's when you see the big jump from the quarterback. So I'm going to go Kyler and the Cardinals. As long as they have a solid draft, I'm going to keep them as a borderline playoff team. They might be more of a mediocre team. Maybe I'm a little bold on them, but I just really like Kyler. So borderline playoff team. The Bills are a playoff team. I don't know if I quite have them as to me, they're the third team in the AFC right now. They're the third best team in the AFC. They have a really promising receiving group with Diggs, Brown, and Beasley. Knox at tight end, Singletary at running back. Allen could really have a breakout year this year. Their defense is still top 5 in the league, and they added a bunch to their D-line, depth mostly. Mario Addison will be a nice edge presence. Jefferson was an underrated add. They added Butler. They added another guy slipping my mind. Secondary, I think Josh Norman could be a decent veteran add for them as well. So the Bills, I think, have improved on both sides of the football. They've lost a couple players on defense, but I think they overall improved. And I think they're a dangerous AFC team because they're probably the most balanced team in the AFC in terms of their potential on both sides of the football. I think it's between them and Baltimore, but at the same time, they're really, really interesting and promising. And if Allen can go to like top 10 quarterback territory, they could be the team to beat in the AFC. So I have them as a playoff team, and I have them as the best team in the AFC East. The Seahawks, I have as a contender. The Seahawks are very good because of Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson is arguably the best quarterback in the league. I think this year, again, he's going to be toe-to-toe with Mahomes. I think Mahomes is the better quarterback right now, but I would not be surprised if Wilson ended up winning MVP and we were calling Wilson the best quarterback at the end of the year. That's how good he is, and that's how magical he is. and he's yet to have a season where he actually has a losing record. It's not going to happen this year as long as he stays healthy. Their offensive line, I don't really think improved. They made a lot of moves on it. I think they lost a little depth. Receiving group, I like that they added Philip Dorsett. I think he's a solid add to their scheme. They'll get their running backs back, so their offense will probably be borderline top 10 thanks to Russell. Their defense, I want to see them re-sign Clowney, but their secondary's gotten a lot better. So if they get Clowney back, I think that they're really looking good as one of the elite teams in the NFC. The New York Jets are, to me, a bottom 8 team. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is the rest right there. The 8 teams. The New York Jets, to me, are the worst team in the AFC East. I think Sam Darnold is probably going to end up being the worst starting quarterback in this division this year. We'll see, but maybe it will be Stidham, maybe it will be the Dolphin quarterback, but I don't think it's bold saying that. I think their defense, even though it's great up the middle, it still lacks corners, it lacks edge rushers, and that's the same problem they had last year that derailed them. Their offensive line is maybe the worst in the league. I know that they've added a couple players there as of late, but it's still bad. They have no game-breaking receiver. They really need one badly. Maybe they get one in the draft. Who knows? But I think they're the worst team in the AFC East, and to me, they have the worst coach in the AFC East. Not even a conversation. The New England Patriots. See, this is interesting. I think I got to move a team up to a playoff territory, and I think it has to be an AFC team. This is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to put the Broncos in, and the reason being is because I think the last team in the AFC is going to come out of the AFC West. Even though the Broncos, I'm going to place here as the leader in the camp house, or what is it? The camp house, the tree house, the whatever it's called house. Even though they're the leader right now, I believe that the Broncos could easily lose this spot to the Chargers or the Raiders. The last AFC spot is an AFC West number 2 seed, if that makes any sense. So yes, the Broncos I'll have placed as the last playoff team in the AFC, but I could see it being the Raiders or the Chargers this year. Now, I do need to move a team up to the borderline playoff conversation as I have 6. So that being said, I am going to move. Ooh, this is difficult. I'm going to move the Chargers there because I did say that the Broncos, the Chargers, and the Raiders are kind of interchangeable given what happens in the draft, and I really think these teams are super close. If the Chargers get an upgrade at quarterback, I'll be sold 100%. So I'm going to actually put the Chargers, which might be shocking to some, as a borderline playoff team, given that they have a proven coach, they have a much better defense, a much better offensive line, and just about every area of their team is really good other than quarterback. So the Chargers are going to be one of those teams that I think you need to look out for. But I'm going to put them as a borderline playoff team right now and move them up a spot, leaving the Dolphins, Lions, Atlanta, the Giants, and Patriots as mediocre. So those are my tier rankings, guys. My contenders are Tampa Bay, San Francisco, Baltimore, Kansas City, the Saints, the Eagles, and the Seahawks. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of every team in the NFL, my tier list for the NFL right now after free agency. If you did, Gronk spike the like button and subscribe to the channel.